Greetings, traveler. Very often people ask me what it's like working in a Japanese games company versus game companies everywhere else. So today I want to talk about three surprising and crazy things that I found out working for Japanese companies in my experience. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 14 years now, and all of that has been here in Japan. So before starting my own company, I was working in the Japanese games industry for a bit over 10 years. And I managed to see the industry from the viewpoint of at least four large companies here. So, without further ado, let's jump into these crazy and surprising things I found about them. So, the first thing in a Japanese game company that I noticed was that, contrary to my expectation about how companies would be, let's say, more academic in their approach, more organized, especially knowing how many legendary Japanese games there are out there, I would think that, or it was my impression that uh, from this long history and this long list of successful Japanese games, there must have been some distilled principles that more or less can guide you towards the direction of how to make a successful video game, or at least a successful feature. So my expectation was that, let's say the team is working on a new ability for the game or a new level for the game and so on, there would be some guiding principles for how to do it in such a way that basically you're in the ballpark of what is fun. What I actually found out was that this concept does not exist. There is no such thing as a how-to. So let me put this a little bit into context. We were working on a sports game, and for that sports game we had to come up with abilities or stats for the players, and then for the players we would have to balance the overall strength of each player and each ability in the game. So since that was not really the area I was working on, I was just talking to other game designers who were looking at this area. So when I was asking questions of, how do you decide the features? How do you make sure that the balance is good? How do you make sure that the numbers that you came up with will, provide players with a good gameplay? The answer I consistently got is, well, this is how you do it. And I thought, well, what do you mean, how do you do it? This is how you do it. Like, what did you think? How did your reasoning get you to this point where you think that you should do it this way versus something else? And the answer I consistently got was, no, this is how you do it. If you do it any other way, it's not good. But no matter how hard I tried to understand what principles lead to this result, I never managed to get an answer. So that kind of showed me that the approach being taken here is that some people just are very experienced in any area of game development. So when the time comes, particularly in game design, when the time comes to design something in that area, they look upon their own experience up to now, and they just produce a result. They're very much the doer kind of personalities. So if you ask what principles guide their decisions, they don't really know, because they've never thought of it in this way. They've never tried to teach anyone. They've never tried to understand what important components are in this experience and how to present them in the best possible way. That's not really how their day-to-day work goes. It's just, I saw this other person doing it, so I do it the same way, or this famous person does it this way, so I'm gonna do it this way and just do it for 30 years, and over time I'll get better. So that was very surprising for me. It was very eye-opening. So the second place that I was surprised in Japanese game companies was when it came to game design documents. Now, of course, you might be thinking, well, what's so special about that? Basically, all games use a design document of some sort, so what is so special about the ones in Japanese game companies? Well, what I found out is that there is an insane amount of reliance on the game design documents themselves. They are extremely detailed. They go over absolutely every single aspect of the game. every menu, every button, every ability, every value. They are extremely detailed, specifically when you compare them to most game design documents that you found in companies everywhere else, basically. So I thought that is surprising in two ways. First, because especially early in a game's development cycle, there's many things usually people don't know. So final values, how abilities interact with each other, or what else exists in the game, and what state of the game would be considered complete. So what are the abilities and the menus and the icons that we need? All these were decided very, very early in the process, and I thought that's amazing and surprising given how early the development was, the stage. And then the other part was that all this very, very detailed document ended up not being used, since because the game would change form very quickly after all these changes were implemented, or the content of the game design document was implemented. Then when the time for the next version came up, then basically most of the game's design documents would have to be redone. So as you can imagine, this took a very, very large amount of time to do. For the game designers, they would get very, very good at it, so they could do it faster and faster, but it wouldn't take away the need to have this step with every iteration of the game. Something that I found was more and more common in other companies was coming up with a prototype, polishing the prototype as much as possible in terms of gameplay experience, and then once the experience seemed promising, then go out and flesh out the rest of the game. In which case, yes, a detailed game design document would be great. But I was surprised by how early this very high detail design document is introduced, and the sheer amount of times it's written and rewritten over and over again. This was very surprising for me in general. So the last thing that really surprised me about Japanese game companies was this, how should I describe it? This crippling fear of public opinion. And this is in the context of showing any detail of the game to the public basically before release. So after talking to people in the team about it, I sort of managed to infer that this comes from the concept of, well, you don't show something to someone if it's not ready. You don't want to show something if it's in an incomplete state. And this, of course, makes sense. I completely understand this statement and this sentiment. However, as we know in games, it's not about us, the developers, liking the game. It's 100% about the audience liking the game. And without the audience's input, it's very difficult to work out all the little flaws, all the nooks and crannies of the game's experience, and make sure it's indeed as good as possible. So what I found out that starting from the beginning of the development all the way to the end of the development, it's not that there was zero external player input, but there was so little that basically it made no difference in the end. When people would be invited to the company or any of the places I worked at to give an opinion on the game, there would be very high pressure on them to give a positive feedback. If there was negative feedback, that would be taken as an insult to the team. So even though this feedback might have been correct, it was very rarely taken seriously by the team, which I thought was very strange. Also, the amount of people invited to take part in these playtesting events was very, very small. So we're not talking about thousands of people, we're talking about 4 or 10 or 16, which is great. Of course, any amount of people playtesting the game before release is a huge benefit. But I was surprised by how few people were invited to try out the game, and how essentially their personalities and their player tastes were not taking that much into account when deciding whether their feedback should be heard or not. And by that I mean, if it's a type of player that really, really likes this game and typically plays this type of game, then their feedback would be very valuable, right? But if it's a player that typically doesn't like our type of game, the one that we're developing, and that player is giving us negative feedback saying he doesn't like the game, this is actually a positive, because type-wise it shouldn't match with that player. So the things he's complaining about are the same things that players that do like this game would love. So it's not really the type of feedback we should be listening to. This is an important thing, I feel, when it comes to evaluating and using player feedback, but one, with a few numbers, and two, with not really checking the player types, I was surprised to see how little feedback there was, and how little that feedback was used in the end. So that was my experience around that. I thought it was very surprising, given my idea, I suppose, I had of the Japanese games industry. And actually, let me give you one more thing that also surprised me. From what I've heard from game companies around the world, overtime typically happens when there is a certain deadline or there's a certain goal for the team to hit, and the team is on a very tight schedule. That is not what I found working in Japan most of the time. So in Japan, working more is a show of being a good employee and caring about the game. So you might think, well, of course that goes everywhere, right? If you're putting in more time, if you're putting in more effort, if you're doing the extra mile for any sort of project, then that just shows that you're passionate and you like the game, and or any project, and you're just a really, really good employee, a really good team member. But the surprising part happened when I noticed that the actual output of the person doing the overtime was not on the same level as the amount of time spent on this task. So in other words, it didn't really matter what the person did in their time working overtime. The fact that they worked overtime was enough to get a big praise from the team, regardless of the output, which was another very, very surprising thing for me. Anyway, that's it for my short list of surprises today. I hope this gives you a different viewpoint into the world of Japanese game development. If you have similar experiences, I'd love to know. If you have a very different experience, if you know some place that does things very differently, I would love to know about that as well. So please let me know down below. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you as always for watching, and have fun.